All right, we are going to get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to this is our sixth session in our summit series. That is the Paid Prevention Summit series to reduce violence in the workplace, or at least reimagining what that looks like. I am Arlene Limas. I'm the CEO for Paid Prevention, Proactive Anti-Violence Education. And really the whole purpose, this is our second year of hosting this summit. The whole purpose of this summit is to have conversations around violence in the workplace and how that spreads over into the society or the communities, and how the communities and society spill into the workplace with violence, and then de-siloing these conversations on what's working in sectors and what's working in certain areas or what's not working. I am incredibly honored to have our next panelist, our next guest for the Summit series. Most of our series sessions so far have had two participants on the panel. We really wanted to give everyone who is participating today some real access, some real time with with our guest, because it is really a wealth of knowledge and an incredibly different perspective, for me at least, on how we should start thinking about protecting ourselves, protecting our loved ones, protecting our communities. So I'm super excited to start this conversation. Diane's bio will be, as all our guests, their bios will be in that chat. Please take a look at it and read more, find out more about her. But without really wasting any more time, attorney, professor, author, activist, and I'm very happy to now say a friend. Welcome, Diane Rosenfeld. Welcome. Can I get you to unmute, my friend?
It's my first time using Zoom. So sorry about that. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here, and I've been looking forward to this.
Great. So I'm just going to start off right now with sharing with our community what the 39 words, I think, in Title IX, what they say. Okay. So it says, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. That's how it started over 50 years ago.
Yep.
So can you share with us a little bit where that's been morphed to, or where it's been added on to or strengthened, and what is really Title IX all about now?
So Title IX, in my opinion, is really one of the two strongest civil rights that women have, given that we're not part of the Constitution. And just historically, Title IX, after it was passed, was challenged by the NCAA to make sure that women couldn't play football. So even though it doesn't say anything about sports in Title IX, did you all notice that? When Arlene read that, sports is not mentioned, but Title IX is, when people talk about Title IX, they immediately used to think about sports. But Title IX is a sex discrimination statute that was passed to let women into schools, into colleges where they weren't allowed to be admitted before. And in around 2004, I started doing work on campus sexual assault. And in 2007, I created and proposed a course at Harvard Law School on Title IX that was all about campus sexual assault. And when I did, the dean said, "Really, you can teach a whole class on this?" And I said, yes. And it was at the time when people just weren't thinking about what schools' obligations were on addressing and preventing sexual harassment, of which sexual assault is the most extreme form. So started teaching that class in 2007. I had worked at the Justice Department as the senior counsel in the Violence Against Women office. And that's when I started really thinking about sexual assault. And I had done some work after I left the Justice Department, advising all Title IX recipients on what they should be doing about Title IX and sexual harassment. So I started teaching the course in 2007. And in 2009, after President Obama was elected, I had the opportunity to meet Arlene OLY, who was the in charge of the Office for Civil Rights of the Department of Education, which enforces Title IX. And I invited her to my Title IX class, and she came, and I gave her a white paper, and I said, this is what your office can do on campus sexual assault. This is what the power of your office to prevent and address campus sexual assault. And she took it and she ran with it. She's a great bonobo. And in 2011, she and President Biden announced the Dear Colleague letter. And then the Trump administration reversed everything that we did, all the progress that we made on Title IX. And now we're trying to regain the progress under President Biden. And it's an area where the law is kind of all over the place, but what remains is what students can do to create cultures of sexual assault on campus. And that's one of the things I really want to talk about today.
Sure. Great. Well, thanks for that and that little bit of history. So you mentioned something. She's a great bonobo. So, right, we want to make sure that the people who are joining us today really understand what this concept is and what this, I'm going to sound corny here, but what this way of life, right, is. What, please share with us, because it's been the center of your work these last several years.
It has. So many of you on the call today are already affirmatively part of the Bonobo Sisterhood. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, I'm going to tell you just the bonobo principle, and then I'll explain about bonobos. The bonobo principle is 2 parts. This is how bonobos act, and I'll tell you all about them in a second. But the first part is 1, nobody has the right to pimp my sister. And by pimp, I mean to include abuse, harass, exploit, gaslight, rape, assault, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, my sister. And if you agree with that part, you're halfway there, right? Nobody has the right to harm your sister. Is that right?
Right.
Second principle, everybody's my sister. And if we abide by those 2 principles and we be bonobo in our lives, we will change the power structures that exist right now under patriarchy. This is our best hope, in my opinion. Okay, so a little background. So I was telling Arlene before we started, I don't even have a copy of my book. I'm in my study. I have no copies of my book. I usually have one right here, but I've given them all away. So
you see mine right there. I put mine on the back there so that you can see it. Right.
Thank you. So that's the book. I encourage you to check it out. And the wonderful Sarah MacArthur just put a link in for people who are interested in finding it. And I also saw that Udit is on the phone, so on the call. So I wanted to give a special shout out to Udit, an extremely amazing bonobo. I had been working on legal policy to stop violence against women for many years, since like the mid late 90s. And the law is really, really patriarchal. And what I can say about that is that literally in legal history, men wrote themselves into the law as our kings, as kings of their own castles, where they had explicit rights to rule over the inhabitants of that castle. And all of the things that women's groups have done to change law haven't been effective because it's broken at its base. It's flawed at its base, because law in the United States, at least, has come out of a patriarchal legal system of propertied white men. And you can't just shoehorn women into that as full humans. You need to really start again. In about 2004, I met an anthropologist named Richard Wrangham who wrote a book called Demonic Males, and I was on a panel with him, and he talked about how in primates, the book is about the origins of human sexual violence. And he talked about how in primates, males use sexual coercion and violence to control females as reproductive resources. So chimpanzee males will batter female reproductive partners when they're fertile in exact proportion to how fertile they are. Gorillas commit infanticide, and orangutans do something that looks like rape because they force copulations with lone females. And then he talked about bonobos. Bonobos, I can't really do a show of hands to see how many of you are familiar with bonobos, but bonobos look like chimpanzees, but they're a separate species. And bonobos are only found in a certain area in the Congo, and they have developed an entirely different social system in which it's defined by female-female alliances. And when a female bonobo was aggressed upon by a male, she would let out a special cry, and all other females within earshot, whether they know her, like her, or are related to her, come immediately to her aid, and they form this instantaneous coalition, and they fend off the male, and they send him into isolation, and then he comes back after a few days, and then they all make up and share food, and evolutionarily, bonobos have eliminated male sexual coercion. So what we see in bonobos is wanted sexual contact. When a bonobo male makes an initiation, if the female isn't interested, he walks away. And evolutionarily, they have eliminated male sexual coercion.
Wow.
So when I found this out, I want to finish for just a sec. My mind was blown completely. And I was like, is this real? So Richard Wrangham and I created a special course that was taught between human and evolutionary biology at Harvard and Harvard Law School on theories of sexual coercion for 3 years. And I dug really deeply into the bonobos to see if this was a real thing that we could focus on as a model for human behavior. And bonobos and chimpanzees share 98.7% of their DNA with humans. And there is no reason that we are not as bonobo as we might claim to be chimpanzee. So I use bonobos as a behavioral model for how we can live outside of patriarchy and in peace.
It was fascinating to me. It's still fascinating to me to hear it now. It was fascinating to me when you shared, when I heard you speak the first time, and through reading the book. It's not a new concept that people want community and want support, and we yearn it, right? We yearn for it. We want the support of our coworkers. We want the support and camaraderie and community of sports teams, of school friends. So what came into mind when I heard you speak on this is like, yes, we need this community. We want this community. But I think that people have community and then they're disappointed by community. They ask for support of that community, and then it falls short. Or in case of survivors or victims that come forward, they're not supported, they're not believed. So how do we get over this hiccup? How do we get over that feeling of, I can't count on my community, I can't count on them? How do we get around that, Diane?
I think we create the bonobo sisterhood, and we think about what it means to act like a bonobo and come to one another's aid, whether we know, like, or are related to another person. And instead of our first reaction to hearing a bonobo call being, well, what was she wearing, or why didn't she leave? The kind of victim blaming that we are absolutely inundated with in our current society and mindset. And we don't say that at all. We say, no, nobody has the right to do that to her. She's my sister. And we come to her aid in all of these ways, even if it's, supporting somebody like Amber Heard through a collective letter. And it's about creating communities that are just based on the bonobo principle rather than based on kin affiliation or other affiliation. Just knowing that, like, all right, these 6 people will come to my aid.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think empowering people, in my experience, when I was empowered with the ability to be a good bystander or a good upstander, it changed a lot for me. And I know people are surprised when I say I probably use my bystander and upstander intervention twice a week. And it could be just a little thing like, hey, you guys okay? Or making eye contact with someone who's waiting for a bus and they're seem to be surrounded by people that may look like a threat. Are you okay? I can wait here. It's so empowering to me. Once I was given that gift that I could be an upstander and I was confident to be a good upstander, it was huge. And I don't know those people. I'll never see those people again. So I think this sense of community that you're saying of being in this bonobo sisterhood, it's possible. I know I experience it quite often.
Yeah, it's here, and the magic of meeting you, Deet, and you, and all the people from Empowerment Self-Defense Global was that, like, the Venn diagram of the bonobo sisterhood and empowerment self-defense is, kind of almost a perfect overlap, because the key, in my estimation, is knowing that you have a self-worth defending and learning empowerment self-defense. And once you learn self-defense, it changes everything. It is transformative. And I think that a lot of people here today are familiar with self-defense, are engaged in self-defense. But there are a lot of people whose first response when I talk about self-defense is worrying about victim blaming. And I just want to say at the outset that I am not in any way blaming somebody if they're attacked, even if they know self-defense and they freeze, or they go into tonic immobility or whatever, they weren't able to avoid the assault. But it is the case that it's our reality that we have to know self-defense. And when I took self-defense with 5 students, after one of my students was being harassed by an ex-boyfriend, I was totally transformed. And I remember, like, we took it from the Harvard University Police Department. And I remember after the last class, we were like walking on Harvard Yard and we were kind of like completely amped up, like, okay, bring it on. We're just like, we can walk down the street. And, like, as a result of having taken self-defense, if I'm walking on a street and there's some guy behind me, I don't look at him as a scary guy anymore. I look at him as a series of elbow strikes. And it really, I agree, it is really transformative. But you learn in self-defense from the outside in that you can self-defend, but it also brings out from the inside out that you have a self-worth defending. And then that message carries through in the bonobo way, because when you realize and learn the strength of yourself to self-defend, it makes you much more able, willing to envision helping others. And being an upstander like you are twice a week makes such a huge, huge difference. These little things that when you stand near somebody, just your presence, just being there, just standing up for somebody, just letting somebody know that you're there for them, and having your ear tuned to the bonobo call at all times, because it's a reality. One of the other really critically important things that this model changes is the idea that we don't have to ask for permission to self-defend and to use proactively violence in our self-defense. We all have the right to self-defend. And the idea of asking for permission is something that we need to do away with. We all have permission to defend ourselves and our sisters, and everybody's our sister.
Thank you. Just listening to you talk, I'm just seeing like we came to the same spot in like flipped. You, in my opinion, I don't know you well enough, but you came to self-defense as kind of a confident, well-spoken individual. You knew about setting a boundary, maybe. You knew about using your voice. You used the law as your voice, and without the physical skills. I came to this spot having all the physical skills and watching my peers have all those physical skills, but not being able to ward off inappropriate coercion or an abuser in elite sport, right? So I was looking for those skills to set a boundary, to use my voice, to be aware of my surroundings, to identify inappropriate coercion. So we both came from the opposite end of the spectrum, but we both got to that joint toolbox together.
Yeah. And I think that the key, again, with the Venn diagram idea, the key there is psychological. It's getting out of a patriarchal mindset that teaches us we need to depend on men to protect us, but they're protecting us from what? Other men.
Yes.
Right. So this is what I call the fallacy with a PH of the male protection racket, is that we are socialized to depend on men for our protection, but the protection is from other men. And in this system, we lose, because this gives men the power, the entire power, to decide who among us is maybe worthy of protection, and then whether or not they're in the mood to offer it. And whether this constellation of factors of our privilege as women will produce actual protection. It does not. It does not. Governments don't protect us. And on campuses, the 1 in 4 statistic has been consistent no matter who's in charge. And we have to protect ourselves and one another. We just have to. And, bringing this back to campus. So I don't want to lose sight of what you just said, Arlene. It is the psychological value of knowing you have a self-worth defending is priceless. And it's the key, I think, to everything. And another like illustration of, besides sports where people have all these physical skills, but not being trained to use them in self-defense, is the military. So in the military, there are all these women in the military who have learned to speak the language of violence, which is primarily a language reserved to men. But the sexual assault rate in the military is through the roof. So They're not also learning, they're not ever taught, like, no, you are entitled to self-defense. So what I really want to teach everyone is you are entitled. And if you don't know that, I know that, and I'm going to defend you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. You touched base on that statistic 1 in 4, right? So I'll read another quote about Title IX, and it says, schools are legally required to respond to and remedy hostile educational environments or risk federal funding. So if that's the case, and it's been the case for quite a while, how are we still at the same place of 1 in 4? And it's probably more than that, because we know that people underreport, right? That this is an underreported activity. So I know the answer is us, right? It's our sisterhood, and it's being bonobo. But what else? What else is going on there?
It's that we only look at it on the end. We don't look at it in prevention. So it's why your work is so critically important, because of your focus on prevention. And schools are supposed to, like, federally required to have prevention programs. And in our work, we need to be really forcing schools to take that prevention gavel up. and have effective self-defense. Like self-defense programs are primary prevention. Schools don't use them. And I really, in the next 2 years, want to change that, because it's that kind of primary prevention um, that we need to really change the statistics. I mean,
So,
I can give you my crash course on Title IX is to think of it as legally, it's a three-legged stool, and it's prevention, response, and resolution. And if you're missing any of those three legs, you don't have, in my legal opinion, a compliant program with Title IX so that you could be subject to losing your federal funding. And so it's prevention, response, and resolution. In the middle of the hunting ground, which I recommend to all of you who haven't seen it, it's a film about campus sexual assault, and trigger warning, it's a really intense film. And if you watch it, not at night and with a friend, and be very aware of the trigger warning. But in the middle of it, I say, imagine that you're a parent and you get a letter and it says, dear Ms. Jones, we're so excited that your son Johnny is going to be a freshman at Massachusetts State University this fall. And we want you to know that, when he comes to campus, there will be an RA to meet him and help him get accommodated with his courses and with the campus. And we wanted to let you know that while he's here, he has a 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 chance of being a victim of a drive-by shooting. And we have a prevention course for him to maybe tell him how not to be shot. And we have a special office for him in case he is shot to deal with the trauma of it. And the most vexing part is that the shooters are all other students. Thank you for your tuition money. We look forward to welcoming Johnny in the fall. And this is like literally what schools do. They have like an hour of prevention, and then they have an Office of Sexual Assault Prevention and Response where you can go to deal with your trauma after you've been assaulted. And in resolution, they do nothing effective that would feed back into the community and let the community know sexual assault is not tolerated. On the other hand, you could look at prevention and put resources into developing campuses of sexual respect, developing cultures of sexual respect on campus. And this is really easy work because students know what their culture is like and what their sexual culture is like, and giving them tools and resources to build sexual respect among one another is something students are like wildly interested in. And it's all very doable in the laboratory of campuses. And self-defense is a huge, huge, huge part of this.
Yeah. I mean, why not as part of the orientation, anywhere from 16 to 30 hours of training?
Right.
Why not as just part of the orientation process?
Right.
Or part of, it's a class that you take that first year on campus. It's just part of the curriculum. It's so easy.
Right.
Easy, but not simple. Simple, but not easy, right?
But it's going to be done.
So that brings me to something that you're saying when you're saying of this three-pronged approach of Title IX and how it's ineffective. It's not really working. One of our other panelists early in the summit made a comment about school safety, public school safety. Yes, I'm sure speaking to universities, but his expertise is more of that active shooter situation and that form of violence in schools. And his closing comment was, school resource officers, Band-Aid. Lockdown drills and active shooter drills, Band-Aids. We need a full reconstructive surgery on how we approach violence in schools and in the education.
I love that.
Right? So
I love reconstructive surgery.
Yes.
Right.
I think that's what you're saying. You're saying as well, these things aren't working. We need to shake it up. And your version of shaking this up is it's just part of the curriculum. It's just part of the training. We're changing this.
Right. Right. And we're changing it through the framework of the bonobo sisterhood and a Bonobo Sisterhood self-worth defending course where you have, it's the marriage of empowerment, self-defense, and the Bonobo Sisterhood. It's like you have the self-defense course, but you also are specifically taught about your own self-worth.
Mm.
So that's the answer. I love the idea of reconstructive surgery. It can be built at Harvard Law School last semester. They had the Title IX office sponsored a luncheon and gave out copies of my book. And the luncheon was to talk about a self-worth defending. And then we followed it up over the weekend with an empowerment self-defense course, to which I gave the introduction, and that was great and really well received. And now we'll do it again, and we want to do it at the college. It's kind of starting to build, and I teach as a guest professor at Bocconi University in Milan. And last year I taught about the Bonobo Sisterhood. I had, and you can all do this. I encourage all of you to do this in your circles. I had the students, there were 80 people in the class, and I had them turn to the 6 people who were closest to them, take out their phones, open WhatsApp, and exchange numbers. I said, that's your Bonobo Sisterhood. And there were men in the class and gender nonconforming people. And I'm like, so you don't have to be a woman, female sister. You can be a sister. And you have your Bonobo Sisterhood now. So anytime that you are in trouble, you make a Bonobo call, that's your group. So one of the leaders of this class who was very taken with the whole concept is now in student government. I'm going back there in November. And she's amassing power. So she says, okay, let's get the self-defense going. So I was in touch with Judith, and then through that, and Rami, and then through that, I was put in touch with the person in Milan, and we're going to offer a self-defense course this year. A Bonobo Sisterhood self-worth defending class. So that's how it starts. You know, like students have so much power, and I know you're so amazing. Students have so much power with their administrations, but they need to like ally with each other and know their voice and then speak it.
How do we empower them to even know that? How do we get them to understand? Because I think the powers that be hope they never understand that.
You are so completely right. Through, I don't know, we need Sarah MacArthur for that, because she's our genius about getting our messages out. So Sarah, that's your assignment, getting the message out. We are developing a toolkit. I mean, meaning the Bonobo Sisterhood Alliance, for campuses and for students. And that will be one thing to start it. But also I'm interested in doing, and I'm just at the strategic planning point of this, but doing a 50-state tour on the Bonobo Sisterhood self-worth defending course, and having as many schools involved in that as I can. It's hard. I just want to say that even when President Obama was in office, and it was really hard to get college presidents in a room to talk about this. College presidents, they don't want to hear about it unless they have to hear about it. So we have to create something, some line of communication that makes them want to hear about it.
Yeah. This is where you and I have had private discussions on this. Like, how do we get around this idea that everybody knows we're being impacted by violence? Everybody knows it's impacting our life every day on some level, whether that be directly at us or to our loved ones, or impacting the potential of people that we work with, or impacting our potential partner. All of these things are being impacted by violence. But when we talk to people, we can't say violence. We can't say violence. It's happening. It's happening every day, everywhere. We can't say violence. Mm-hmm. We'd love to have your programming, but we can't say that it's violence prevention, because we don't have a violence issue, but we have a violence issue. So, wow. I mean, you're saying you couldn't get these university presidents even in the room, right?
Right. Right. So you're asking, what are other ways to create inroads? to the conversation. And I think prevention, community, culture change conversations. But I think we have to just be really honest about the elephant in the room, which is toxic masculinity to be changed. So in my book, I talk a lot about patriarchal violence. And patriarchal violence is a term that I use to suggest that the level of violence in a society is explained by the level of violence needed to maintain a patriarchal social order. And in the United States, where we think that women have so many rights, although we don't think that anymore since Dobbs, but we used to think that women had so many rights, but actually at the highest level of law, women have no rights to challenge male sexual violence for the most severe, extreme types of violence, which are domestic violence, homicide, and gang rape. And those were the two cases where the Supreme Court said no right to be free from gender motivated violence. That was a federal statute that was from gender motivated violence, and it was struck down, and nobody even knew about it or about it being struck down. I knew about it. I lost my mind over it. And then the second one was no right to enforcement of an order of protection, even in a state that has a particular law mandating enforcement of an order of protection. And that was in a case, Castle Rock versus Gonzalez, where Jessica Gonzalez's 3 children were murdered by her estranged husband, who had kidnapped them and held them over a period of the evening, during which Jessica called the police at least 8 times, pleading for help, and they didn't do. And the Supreme Court, Scalia, said, well, you have no right. No, the state legislature in Colorado couldn't have meant shall when it said shall in its statute. You had no real right to compel law enforcement.
So once again, I think we're back to, on all our sessions that we've had these conversations on, is the power comes in empowering the individual. So as you advocate for self-defense and we advocate for human safety skills in the workplace, it is empowering the individual, and then that individual will impact policy, will impact other things as they grow with these set of tools. So we do most of our adult learning at work. PAVE hosts to impact this at work and in the workplace. You're working at the university level. The incredible network of empowerment self-defense professionals across the world are doing it on a one-on-one basis or small group basis. Can we really have an impact? Can we really have a culture shift with us?
Yes, and thank you for raising that. That whole diatribe I just did about law was about patriarchy, and bonobos give us a living example that patriarchy is not inevitable. Patriarchy is a system that is enforced through violence in so many ways, and through non-enforcement of non-intervention by men with other men's violence, and this like agreement about non-intervention. And to your question about empowerment, the answer is, not surprisingly, the bonobo sisterhood, because the bonobos have a collective self-defense. And that's the thing that we need to keep in mind that we haven't tried yet, is like individual self-defense is great. And like I said, it makes you more able to intervene and to stand up for others, but to really think about what does it mean to have a collective self-defense and to know that we are entitled to it. And bonobos did all of this. They accomplished a peaceful society. There is no lethal violence within bonobos. They're the only primate that has no lethal violence. They don't have boundaries that they defend through killing other people, like chimpanzees will use lethal violence over other chimpanzee troops that they feel are invading their territory. Bonobos have none of that. They're xenophilic. not xenophobic. It means they love strangers, they share food. We can be like bonobos. And the concept is a collective self-defense. So not just an individual self-defense, a collective self-defense.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic.
And
So-
wait, I just need to say that bonobos did this all without a constitution or laws.
Yeah, yeah,
All I have to say.
fantastic. So one of the things that I enjoyed in your book is this idea of politeness and this culture of politeness that we have to work within. Please share with our group today your thoughts on that.
Well, we're taught to be good girls, and we're taught to ask for help instead of helping ourselves. And like on the playground, when we're, little kids on the playground, the boys are taught to fight back, right? Well, you defend yourself and you fight, and here's how to fight, kid. And the girls are taught to tell the playground supervisor if a boy is picking on them or if a girl is picking on them. We're not taught to know that we have selves worth defending and that we can use the language of violence, that we have the permission, even if we're girls, to use the language of violence. And instead, we're taught to like, be a good girl. If you think about it, so the case that I talked about where the federal civil right to be free from gender motivated violence was overturned, there were no riots on the street. Women didn't overturn cars or loot buildings or pose any kind of pressure to the system that would require them to pay attention to us and maybe change. Right? So we don't do that, but we have to figure out another language to really create pressure on the system and change the system. Like, not be good girls. Gina Davis has this great new book out called Dying of Politeness. And the title came from, she was in a car and she's talking about how, she was taught to be polite when she was growing up. And she was in a car and I think one of her relatives was driving and he was driving like a complete maniac and they all thought they were going to die, but nobody was going to say anything. And I think he was having a stroke or something and like finally pulled over and everybody was saved. But they were like not going to say anything because it would be impolite. And this also relates to, especially with teenagers and like young adults, the idea of compliance sex, which is chapter 5. And it's a term that I came up with to describe how so many young women feel the pressure to comply in sexual situations and in hookup culture to sex and encounters that they don't affirmatively want. And the idea between like wanted sex and consensual sex is very different. And I want a world where we have wanted sex and where things are mutual and where all people know they have rights to bodily integrity and sexual autonomy.
I'm going to just share a personal kind of connection to what you're saying. And I kind of form it in when we grow up. I think it's as we're growing up, we need people to believe in us. I think that's really super powerful to have people to believe in us and tell us that they believe in us. So I'll share a personal story. And my family is not violent, although they're all martial artists. They are not violent at all. Like my mom and dad, they don't swear.
I see your mom on the call.
Yes,
The
yes.
Fabulous Diane. Hello, Diane. Nice to see another great Diane.
And so I'm going to share 2 stories, personal stories that I feel really shifted my life. Okay. One of them was in 3rd grade. Someone at school said, 3:30 in front of the church, I'm going to beat you up. We're going to settle this. Okay. And so I went home and I told my dad, I said, hey, this person said 3:30 in front of the church. And he said, you have to go. You have to go. I will go there with you, but you have to go. Because if not, it's not going to stop.
Mhm.
So you have to stand up for yourself. And we went, it was handled. It was, I can't say it was great, but it worked out, right? It worked out. It wouldn't have worked out if had I not handled it that way. So that idea that, okay, you've got this, you can go, I'm behind you. It allowed me to really stop something that could have spiraled out of control. And the next thing is I was struggling with how different cultures were being represented at school and how we had certain things that we celebrated and certain things that never ever even came up. Like we never even talked about what maybe other cultures did, what my Mexican family did. And I wanted to share that. What my Polish family was doing, I wanted to share that. And so my mom said, well, I think you should write your principal a letter and tell them how you're feeling. And it was just so empowering and so like, I believe in you. You can do this, write this. And it changed. And luckily for me, those two things really said like, man, I've got some power. I can do this. And I've got the support behind me when I do. So people believing in you, and this happened many times for me in sport and in martial arts where people out of the blue just came and told me they believe in me. I think it's so important. So how do we put that in that bonobo sisterhood support system?
I think that's a great question, and thank you for sharing personal experiences like that, and I can definitely relate. It's, I saw Goodall a couple weeks ago, speak in Boston, and she said that she had the magic of a supportive mother, and to have parental support is so critical in our formation, of course. But what do we do when people don't have that support? How do we give it? How do we give it to one another?
Yes.
Bonobos protect one another's children. We need to protect one another's children. We need to believe a child who comes forward and says anything that is worrisome at all. We need to just believe children and everyone else when they come forward. And that, and to create like sisterhoods around that would be such a gift to the world. Because it starts with children, and that's when a child will lose her voice and feel like she has no boundaries. I also recommend the book by Tarana Burke, Unbound, and she's the founder of the Me Too movement. And I see the Bonobo Sisterhood as like a vehicle to move the Me Too movement into action. So it's like, okay, me too, me too, me too, me too. And then other people who are like, well, it didn't happen to me, but I'm ready to help support you because this is just ridiculous and not civilized and not a way to create a society where everyone is mutually thriving. And through the Bonobo Sisterhood and knowing that we can take this self-defensive and collective self-defensive action really will create a further idea of we believe you, which is the Me Too movement, into action. So another thing about bonobos, so I was saying they protect each other's children. An infant bonobo socially outranks a male, an adult male, so that if an infant bonobo takes food out of the mouth of an adult male, nothing will happen. And if an adult male comes across like good food but sees an infant, he will back away because he knows that the group of mothers will not let him access that food. They share food. We can do this. And one of the other things, and I'm pivoting here for just a moment, if I may, that bonobos seem to do that human women need to learn from, in my opinion, is sharing of resources. And protection is a resource. Food is a resource. I think all women need to do an inventory of our own privilege, identify our resources, value those resources among one another, and share them. So like in law enforcement, I know that my sisters of color have 17 loops to jump through before they can reliably get law enforcement. But if I can make a call and get law enforcement to respond, on behalf of one of my sisters, I'm going to do it. But I'm also going to change that system entirely so that it's not law enforcement. It's like bonobo enforcement, that we're making our own law, which comes from the idea that we all have a human right to thrive in this life, and that violence is a violation of that human right. And violence, like as you were saying, in so many forms, that, and not talking about it as violence, but boundary setting is incredibly important as a preventative measure. I just did a couple of weeks ago a book talk with Ms. Magazine, because they have their 50th anniversary book just out, and it's really a great read. So I encourage any of you to pick that up. It's also a lovely coffee table book and a great conversation starter. But Ashley Judd was on the panel, and we were leaving, and this creepy guy who had asked questions during the panel and kept asking me questions as we were leaving. We were waiting for the elevator, and he was waiting for the elevator, and we started to get in, and I put my hand up and I said, sorry, we can't have anyone else in the elevator, and closed the door in his face. And I was like, boundary. But I wasn't going to get into an elevator space with a strange man. I just don't. Okay. Just needed to get that off my chest. Thank you.
Good for you for setting that boundary.
Yeah.
So we are going to open it up to questions from, if I know that some of you are in places where you can't turn on your camera, but we would love to see your faces as we go to the question period of this session. So you can raise your hand and ask the question, or you can put it in the chat. I think there was, I'm going to look up through this because there was a good comment from Dr.
There was a
Kate.
previous question from
second.
Stephanie as well, Arlene.
Okay, I'm going to share just, it's kind of a comment only from Dr. Kate. In connection to Arlene's comment, I found a similar issue happening in the 15 years of teaching EST participants. Love the physical techniques and all, regardless of the physical prowess. Could you pick the, Kate, I'm going to let you share your thoughts on this instead of reading your comment.
Sure.
Go for it.
Thanks, Diane.
Hi, Kate.
Thanks, Arlene. And hi, Dan. So happy to meet you. I can't wait to meet you next week again in DC.
Me too.
Gosh, this is also powerful. And my comment was about how over these years of teaching ESD, and then also teaching at the university in gender studies and sociology, what I noticed over and over, the power of, yes, the physical component to feel that physical empowerment. And so many people, regardless of their physical capabilities or their interest in martial arts, were able to knock out the 10, 15, sometimes many more techniques. But what I started to find over and over and over and over was how, as soon as I said, all right, no is a complete sentence. Let's do it. Let's go. No. And people, even the biggest sort of badassest, physical, folks were like, no. And they would take their 5 points. We do this sort of 5-point stance, and then, no, please, no. And it just, and sharing that with college students and in sociology, gender courses, and that sort of cracks open that shell of just how pervasive the gender socialization and discrimination is at that. Let's not have you have to use that physical technique. Right. Yay. I want you to have them, but yay, let's not use them, because how you set that boundary in the elevator, where are your points? How are you standing? It's such this overall complete package, but you can't have that package or know that that package exists without understanding the complexities, and sometimes not complexities, of the gender socialization that we're put through. And so I just really appreciate in your book and sort of, Arlene, your comments towards that, because it's so powerful. And how now that I work in corporate with women, to shift from self-defense, because you can't bring self-defense to the corporate world, and talk about empowerment. How do we as a sisterhood create that sense of empowerment, and what the heck does it look like? pulling from the ESD curriculum about that empower, and part of it's the mind. Let's unpack the gender socialization so we can put it into our body, and we can put it into standing by an elevator saying, no, you're not coming in here.
Right. Right.
So it's
Thank you,
powerful.
Kate.
So thank you for that.
Anne, do you want to chime in on that?
Yes, thank you. I didn't know if you were, I didn't know how you wanted to work this. Thank you, Kate. I think that's consistent with my experience. And when I attend or offer I don't teach myself self-defense classes, but I organize them a lot and introduce them. And learning to say no, like you have the right to say no, is so critically the first step. And I mean, even, Harvard law students who are like on the top of their game, and you would think that they would feel entitled, and they don't. Like you have to unlearn femininity and learn this entitlement. And the way that the gender socialization around femininity is all about being a good girl. And being a good girl means you ask for permission for protection. You ask for everything. It's not internal to you. Everything is internal to you. You have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to say no and to be taken seriously when you do.
Great, thank you. I think we have a question from Louise. Dr. Louise?
Yes, thank you. So I find, hello.
I love that background.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Oh.
Yeah, it's my signature. I've experienced sexual violence in just about every sector of my life. I've been a student in elite music schools, huge amount of sexual violence there. I've been in the military, lots of sexual violence there. I've worked in the building trades, sexual violence there. But what I wanted to ask you is, it never crossed my mind that Title IX might cover music students. And it never crossed my mind that Title IX might cover military service. So could you talk about how music students and soldiers might leverage that law to help them? Because the sexual violence is just horrible in both of those arenas.
Right. That's a great question. And I'm sorry to hear that you've had these exposures to violence. So I did work with, I did the sexual assault policy for Berklee School of Music here in Boston. And it was really alarming because it's a particular environment where music professors feel like they have to physically embrace their violin students and tell them exactly how to hold this. And there's so much gender segregation where the women are kind of shepherded towards singing while the guys are the ones playing the instruments. And so I was able to, I think, to change a lot in the culture of Berklee, but it was like the first time that the teachers were thinking, oh yeah, that might not be a good idea. And it's always with closed doors because you need the acoustic segregation. So they had all these justifications for it. But then I think, and I hope that I made them think anew about what a student might be feeling and about how, what the limits on this ought to be. So, so getting that out there to different music schools, I think would be a good thing, but I'm very familiar with how it happens in music schools. And in the military, it applies because the schools get federal funding. So, but there's so much sexual assault in the military and in the military schools. And the military schools are such hostile environments for females. Like you think back to the VMI case and Shannon Faulkner at the Citadel. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with what happened to Shannon Faulkner, in '94, she was accepted at the Citadel, which is a military academy, but it's a private military academy. It's not exactly a US military academy in South Carolina. And when she showed up the first day of school, they were like, oh, no, this is just for men. And they had admitted her thinking she was a man, and she had a 4.0 average and she met all the requirements, and she sued the school. At the same time, there was a lawsuit just about to be filed against the Virginia Military Institute. And to make a very long story short, the fabulous Ruth Bader Ginsburg ruled that the military educational institution in Virginia had to admit women. But then there's a question of, well, how do you treat them once they're in your institution? And if the institution is set up in a patriarchy without ever thinking about, like, what about having women in equal positions, it's also not going to work, because they're just being admitted into this like hyper patriarchal institution, which the military is, and nothing's going to change. So yeah, so it's not just changing patriarchy, it's really replacing it with the bonobo sisterhood. And this is the secret to getting beyond the kind of horrible situation that we see militarily in Israel and Palestine right now. It's like we need to move forward in peace globally, and to show that we can, and that this kind of patriarchal violence is unacceptable.
It's interesting that you shared that about the military and the military schools, because during a presentation we did at the UN earlier this year for the Commission on the Status of Women's event, one of the things that came out from this group of union workers in Canada is that the conversation is not that we're not hiring more women. It's not that the conversation isn't that we have more women in leadership. It's the conversation is that they truly, now it becomes a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging issue, because they're there, we're hiring them, but they really don't belong. They don't feel like they belong. So if there are these kind of normal rites of passages or help that are given to male co-workers that start up, it's not given. The women are just allowed to fail or to fumble through it, or so it's this, yes, what now? They're there. We've given them a seat at the table, you know. But they're, Kate, my dear friend Kate, who's on this call, who's in this room as well, says, you know, they're not picking the music, and they're not picking how they're dancing, right? They're just there. They're in the room. They've been invited to the party, hip hip hooray, you know,
Right.
but they're not picking the music.
That's brilliant, because it's like they're not picking the music, and they haven't done the architecture that created the room. So if
Exactly.
you apply this to the campus setting, you're talking about fraternity parties being the only parties on campus with any social currency. And when we have bonobo sisterhoods on campus, we will have bonobo dance parties that are completely different, that occur in bonobo controlled spaces. Like, the architecture of spaces really matters. Like in fraternities, they have rape rooms. They have rooms designated where, like, men will take intoxicated women and sexually assault them. And in a bonobo sisterhood, in a bonobo dance party, we can dance knowing we're not going to be assaulted, knowing we're not going to be subject to any unwanted sexual contact. So I love the idea of we're not picking the music. I mean, we need real reconstructive surgery, institutional change. The institutions don't change themselves just by adding women to the mix, but institutions are made up of people. They're not buildings, they're people. You know, when I worked for Janet Reno at the Department of Justice, she was the first female attorney general. Like, that made such a huge, huge difference. And the people at the table were all changed. It was really, really interesting, because we can change things, but we need to unapologetically create a collective self-defense.
Sarah, do you want to share the question that came up from Steph?
Yes, from Stephanie Sear, it says, "Hi everyone listening from San Francisco. I have shared the bonobo principles with my university students and they love it, but then ask how. So I think looking for a little bit more of a concrete, how do we do this?"
I think, thanks, Stephanie, and I'm really excited to meet you. I and I really appreciate your support and your giving out the Bonobo sister, you know, your ambassadorship as a Bonobo sister. So thank you, first of all. I think you start with conversations about self-worth defending, which is chapter 6, and then create self-defense courses, which you're probably already doing. And then writing about it, having a student group called the Bonobo Sisterhood Alliance or the Bonobo Sisterhood of whichever university you're at San Francisco, and then building chapters. And students know about social media and how to communicate with one another and with people at other schools. So just getting the word out there. And again, doing it unapologetically and not waiting for permission, not asking for permission to publicize this stuff, but just to grab onto it and say, this is how I'm going to live my life. This is how we're going to implement the Bonobo sisterhood in the real world. Like, it's time.
Great. Do we have any other questions? Deb?
Yeah, I think what's really coming up for me right now around this conversation, or is becoming even more clear, is that this sisterhood piece and the self-worth defending, right? I think in the book at one point, Diane, you're talking about how many times you've experienced the voices of mothers, parents, other people, like coming forward in defense of the other, defending the other, and being able to find that sense of strength when defending someone else. And I think that might be a bit of the connection. It's making me rethink the bystander intervention work that we are doing and can do more of. Usually it is a part of a course, part of a class, there's a segment that's in there, but to really drill down and spend more time, because I think that strength from within comes from finding your voice, but finding your voice is easier to tap into when you are doing it in service of others. So I'm just thinking there's something really lovely about that, about really spending more time drilling more into bystander intervention as a means of helping someone find their no, finding their voice.
I love that idea. And I think it's a very nuanced point. But in the book, I talk about one of my students who, when she reported, she articulates about how often people report so that it doesn't happen to someone else, or in hopes that it won't happen to someone else. And that idea that, like, this happened to me, but I want to move it forward, I want to protect other people from it, is really something to tap into. I agree. It's something we don't talk about and think about, but it's a real thing that people say, nobody had the right to do that to her, before they'll say, nobody had the right to do that to me. You know, it's like how we don't take as good care of ourselves as we take of each other. Christina's on this phone call, and Christina is a long-term friend and almost family member. And she just had COVID, and I talked to her last night, and she's still coughing. And I'm like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to go to the doctor? And she's like, no, I think it's going to go away, blah, blah, blah. I have asthma, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, Christina, let's reverse this conversation and pretend that I'm the one who's coughing. What are you going to say to me? I said, or Harry, our dog, she also takes care of our dog when we're away in our house and our life. I said, or what if Harry was coughing? She said, well, I would take him to the vet. I was like, of course you would. Would you please go to the doctor? And I'm not going to talk to you until you do. But like, we know how to take care of others. We need to love ourselves. Like, self-love is the key to everything. So self-love, be bonobo. But I love this point. I'd love to develop it with you a little offline too. And everyone else. I'm very interested in everyone's thoughts, and please, I'm accessible. I might not get back to you right away, but I will get back to you, and I'm easy to find, and would love to hear and share your thoughts.
And if I could chime in here, I think also, Deb, and I'm sure the community can chime in as well. sometimes people think bystander or upstander intervention has to be, you stepped in between the two people. You did something physical. There are so many other ways that you can be a good bystander and a good upstander besides just the physical altercation. So I think it's really in the way we present all the options you have to be a good upstander. It doesn't mean you have to have physical prowess to be able to stand up for somebody. Sometimes it's making a call. Sometimes it's making eye contact. It's
Right.
hey,
It's standing next to someone. And Arlene,
yes.
this is why your work is so brilliant. It's like these little and major insights that you have into human behavior and how to interrupt violence before it happens. And the other thing is really teaching about toxic masculinity and giving men other ways, men and boys, other ways to be that don't depend upon domination and strength and not listening to women and girls. There, I said it. And here I recommend Jackson Katz's work really highly. He's one of my bonobo brothers. And I have to say, I have a lot of bonobo brothers. In fact, an actual brother who's quite a bonobo, and he's going to be in DC next week too. But, men have a real role to play in this, in supporting their bonobo sisters. And men really suffer in patriarchy in ways that we don't talk about at all. But men are hugely impacted and injured by patriarchal violence in an existential way. And teaching them about bonobo society and how they will thrive in a bonobo society, in a bonobo-like society, I think is really hopeful as well.
Sarah.
Since hearing about the bonobo sisterhood, and I've really started taking notice or thinking about it as a lifestyle, as you mentioned in the beginning, Arlene. And what that looks like is just paying attention. So I was recently traveling. I was waiting to get on the plane. In the hallway, there was a young mother in front of me with a little one who was trying to nap. She had a backpack, was trying to get a water bottle in a backpack and take a stroller down the thing. And she was just struggling. And I had, my bag and my suitcase, but I noticed it. And I was like, oh, an opportunity to be bonobo. I don't know her. I don't know if I like her. Like, I don't know anything about her. But I just said, can I help you? Like, I can push this stroller down thing. I can help you with your backpack, whatever that looks like. And so I just helped her with her stroller, and it was appreciated. We didn't talk again. So I've been looking at it as a lifestyle and how to be bonobo. If that's my little sister going, I need help with my small one, I just need a break, and I can do it, I just go and help them. And thinking about all the ways in every day that we have a chance to be a bonobo sister, including, the acts of standing up for somebody and things like that, but also in the little things as well. So I just wanted to mention that it changed my framing of how I think about paying attention to sisters around me, whether I know them or not.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you are a great bonobo sister already, and an essential part of the bonobo sisterhood and our alliance. The thing that we have to get over in terms of our gender socialization is to regard each other as competition, and to go in the first instance to whether I like her, whether I know her, whether I'm related to her, and just help. It's a very human intervention to make us think that we should only help people who might help us back, or we should only help people who are like us, or, who are in our group. And there are all these ways in which patriarchy has created these artificial divisions between women to put us in competition for male protection. And once you take away the value of male protection, because now we're protecting each other, everything opens up. And I mean this, so like a takeaway here is like, instead of like, it's about judgment of other women that we are conditioned and socialized to do every single day. When we see another woman and we think, we judge her, and we judge her on her fashion and her looks and what she's, what she's carrying. And we make judgments. We're so conditioned to do that. And instead of doing that, you look at another woman and you might say, you know what, that might not be my fashion choice, but she has the right to dress however she wants, and she's my sister. And that's it. It's like a very easy calculation, and it's a way of taking something really complex and simplifying it so that we can act on it. So you took her, you saw she needed help, you helped. That makes you a great bonobo sister. It's a better way to live. Instead of thinking, oh, well, she's got it, it's her problem, or it's a private situation, or you see that her husband was picking on her, and is there a way to intervene there? And on that, I want to say that the power of the bonobo sisterhood idea to intervene in domestic violence cases is very strong in this exact way. And this is how I want you to use it and take it out into the world. If you think that somebody is in an abusive relationship, and you know her, instead of saying to her, I think you're in an abusive relationship, and here are some resources, and call me if I can help you when you want to leave, here, you can call these people, or you can call me, and I think you should get out of this relationship. Most people will say, I'm not in an abusive relationship. What are you talking about? It was just a bad day. He just got fired, et cetera, et cetera. They have all these justifications and denials because they have to live in that situation. And it takes a lot to get out of that situation. And one way I'm hoping to short circuit this is to say to her, I'm going to this really cool bonobo sisterhood self-worth defending course on Friday night with some friends, and we're going to pick you up at 6:00. And then you take her to the course, even if you've had the course created just for her. And then she learns from the inside out and the outside in, like I was saying before, that she has a self-worth defending, that she can now set boundaries and back them up. That might be the missing link to really intervening in intimate partner abusive situations. So thank you, Sarah, for bringing that up.
Is there anyone else that has a question? We'd love to hear from you.
We have one online. Vivian says, how can one join Bonobo Sisterhood?
You're in.
You're in. You're in. You're in. We're working on it. We're developing the Bonobo Sisterhood Alliance. It's in formation right now. And sign up on our website for the newsletter. We'll keep people posted.
Vivian, where are you joining us from? Are you joining us from Toronto? Yes. Yeah.
Well,
I think you are connected to DBNC. Yes. Okay. All right. So fantastic.
Yes,
yeah,
I'm connected to DBNC.
Yes. Great. We did some training there. It's outside of Toronto, the greater Toronto area. So fantastic, Vivian. Any other questions? Okay, so before we sign off, we have about 8 minutes, and because Christina, so how do we get this implemented starting in kindergarten and repeated for the first several years of education? Bonobos learn this behavior from birth to exclamation mark. Yes.
so they learn it from their elders, and older bonobos always protect the younger bonobos. That's the structure of their society. So it's about us protecting our younger sisters and teaching them the bonobo ways. And yeah, good question.
Yeah, and I'll share with you, Christina, that, we're, like I mentioned before, PAVE is trying to take this idea of training and skill set to the workplace, because we do most of our adult learning at work. So if we can keep hitting it on an individual level with these great organizations, Lisa Gata has been teaching in high schools in California for 30 years, the impact that that's having, right? So we're hitting it from all different areas, and that's what the movement has been doing for quite a long time now. But now since the first incubator, we've really tried to structure our attack on this problem, to tell you the truth. And so we have PAVE prevention, doing it in the workplace. We have now our Bonobo Sisterhood, trying to change things at a university level and beyond. We have programs in middle schools in Albania where the skill set is being imparted. So, we are just getting started, believe it or not, and we're already having a huge impact.
Right. The work that you're doing is phenomenally important and effective. And I'm beyond excited to be partnering with you.
Great. Thank you.
Really. No kidding. So
we have just a few minutes left. And as I started this and then got distracted by Christine's comment, it's always great to hear you with your wisdom, Diane. So in these last couple minutes before we sign out, is there anything else you'd like to share with us about motivational, or just what you're doing, or please?
Sure. Thank you. So Frederick Douglass said that power concedes nothing without demand. And each of you has a voice, even if you're not sure how to use it. You each have a voice, and your voice matters, and you have the right to use it. Let me just tell you that. And the law can sometimes help, but know that creating a sisterhood around you and then being really loud about what you want and what you demand is really, really going to help. So an example that I have about like attitudes, how attitudes promote violence and the institutional reaction to hostile environments was in 2010, fraternity members at Brett Kavanaugh's old fraternity chanted on campus, "No means yes, yes means anal." Around, they chanted it, and they were walking around, they were marching around the freshman girls' dorm on a Friday night in October, chanting this loudly, militaristically. And I got word of this and was able to listen to it on YouTube. And it was really threatening and completely shocking to me that in 2010, Yale fraternity pledges were doing this. And I was like, what kind of environment does that create for the freshman girls who are like, have worked so hard to get there, and they're in their dorms and they're hearing men loudly chanting that the men are not going to listen to them. Like yes means no, no means, like, it was so unbelievably toxic. And I wound up representing 16 current and former Yale students in a federal civil rights complaint that we filed with the Office for Civil Rights of the Department of Education, who then came in and investigated Yale, and it got a lot of national press. And Yale finally started to change their environment on sexual assault and do a lot of new training and programs. They still need to do self-defense, but it also resulted in one of those plaintiffs, Alexandra Brodsky, founded an organization called Know Your Nine with another bonobo from Amherst College. And it was founded on the theory that if they had known their rights under Title IX when they first got to school, their entire educational trajectories would have been different. So they formed this online organization to help students across the country file Title IX complaints, know their rights, create groups with one another, create support. It's a purely bonobo organization. They're having their 10th anniversary right now. So if you want to support them, please go online and do. But this is how to get bonobo out into the world, is like, teach you your rights, teach everybody their rights, support those rights, even if we're the ones who are imagining those. The rights don't come from the government to us. That's, like, I think, not the right way to look at it. Law is not giving us our rights. We have to claim our rights, articulate our rights, and fight for one another's rights, and just stand up every single day for ourselves and for one another.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Diane. This was an amazing session. We just are so fortunate, feel very fortunate and grateful to have you join us. We look forward. I'm going to speak for the movement right now. The movement looks forward to the sisterhood and everything that we can accomplish together. So I really appreciate having you. Thank you for all of you that participated today. Please join us for our last two sessions next week. We finish it out strong. Our next session is dealing in the hospitality sector and how we learn from that. The title is 86ing toxicity. So if anyone has come through the hospitality sector when something is canceled or the order is canceled, it's 86th. So that's what the discussion we'll be having with some great panelists. So please join us then. Thank you again. And I'm going to finish this one up a little different. I'm just going to say be bonobo. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me. It was really great to see you all. And Arlene, you're amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
As you are.
See you soon.